Joining us. Yeah, a bit of a face for radio this morning. I'll get this one out of the way. An accident with a dog and a highly polished dining room floor and my desk. Not so good. But anyway, today is not about me. This is about you. And thank you so much for joining us. Where this morning we talk about how to secure HR and talent's seat at the exec table. For far too long now, HR is quite often seen as an operational function, or worse still, even perhaps sometimes a cost center. Well, this morning, we're going to help you to change all of that. And I'm delighted this morning that we're going to be joined by Sharon Benson. Now, Sharon is somebody that we've known job train for at least 15 years now. She probably won't thank me for saying that. She's just recently been named as HR Magazine's most influential HR practitioner, and she's currently the Transformation and People Director at Edison Young. She's also just yesterday been nominated for the 2023 Northern Power Women Awards as well. She's got a huge amount of experience in HR transformation. I'm really, really pleased that she's agreed to come and join us for this morning's session. Now, this session is for you. So you got any questions at all, please do feel free to put them to us. We're live on Crowdcast. We're live also on LinkedIn this morning. So as long as you can hear me okay, we will get started. Now, there's going to be a common thread running through this. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Covey, but one of the most famous quotes from Covey was, "Seek first to understand and then be understood." And that is a really key part of the themes that we'll be discussing this morning in terms of understanding the business first, understanding its needs, its requirements, its strategy, where the value sits within people within the organization, and how to put a lot of that in practice and then frame it in such a way that the exec and the leadership will really buy in. So without any further ado, I'm going to invite Sharon on screen now. So we'll just have a quick look through and find Sharon. Hang on, where are you? Okay, right, Sharon, inviting you on screen now. And hopefully you should pop up in just a second. We have had a run through this morning. We should be pretty well prepared. So with a bit of luck and a drum roll, Sharon should appear in just a moment. There she is. Hi, Sharon.
Can you hear me?
How are you?
Can you hear me okay, Giles?
I can hear you perfectly.
Morning. No pressure.
Good morning. Now, we've done chats like this before, but never online. So this I know. So thank you so much. Now, you and I, in terms of a quick introduction, do you just want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself? I've done a brief intro, but just to help frame this for everybody that's joined us.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in HR now for, thanks for that, 15 years. It's a bit longer than 15 years, actually. And I'm currently interim transformation and people director, so I'm just wrapping up that interim project at the moment. So anybody that knows me on LinkedIn, I'm quite prolific on my posts on there. Yeah, it's all about, creating and, improving the brand perception of the organisations that I work with. So many years in HR, professional services, social services, pharmaceuticals, financial services. So I've been about a bit, I think it's fair to say, Giles.
You do yourself down. So in terms of the way you approach HR specifically, you've done a lot of transformation projects. You probably, I think you have won a number of awards, and I think a big part of that has been that you have, or have perceived to be, people recognize you as having quite a high degree of commercial acumen. Has that been very important in your HR career and having an impact? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, my first ever HR job was for a law firm, which was called Hammond Suddards at the time. And I'll never forget it. In my first couple of days, they didn't want to give me a desk space or an office. It was like, well, you're HR, you're not a fee earner, so why should we give you office space? And I thought, well, do you know what? I'll show you who's a fee earner. And when I first started in that job as an assistant personnel officer, I looked for ways that actually personnel, as we were called back then, could create value, either through reducing sickness absence, through improving our ability to attract legal secretaries, fee earners, solicitors. And in our first year, we took our secretarial ratio down from 0.97 to 0.57, which doesn't sound a lot, but when you're growing your business, that was hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of saving. And I thought, yes, I'll have my office now, thanks. I am a fee earner. So to be fair, working in that environment probably is what gave me the passion and the bug for being able to, I suppose, justify HR's existence, that it isn't just a necessary evil to do contracts and hire and fire, but actually a real value creating function. It could actually add value to the bottom line, not just by cost savings, but actually value generation.
Yeah, so we, for everybody's benefit, we went out for dinner a couple of weeks ago just to discuss this session and sort of plan it out a little bit. And you made the comments, and it was quite painful, but probably also quite true. So sometimes HR are seen as the people that put the posters up.
Oh, definitely. My one of my closest friends from school, when I said I was going to do another job, I was going to do another transformation project, she was like, I don't really get what you do. You know, HR in our place just put posters up. At which point I was obviously quite horrified and said, right, okay. And the best way I could try to bring it to life for us, she is actually a massive Bake Off fan. I thought, right, let me try, bring it to life through something that I know she can connect with and tell the story that way. And I tried to say to her that actually, if you think of the Bake Off, they're all in the same tent, they all have the same ingredients, they all have the same equipment, they all have the same, you know, eggs, flour, etc. But some will bake a brilliant cake and be, you know, crowned master baker of that week, and others, it won't be great. And I tried to say to her that HR is very similar. So if you think of your board profiles, might be the eggs, you know, your performance framework might be the flour. I kind of went through it in that way to say, and that's really, you know, some HR teams are great and some aren't so great. And I think the biggest thing on reflection of sharing that story with her, which did give her a chuckle, was that sometimes HR functions go into organisations looking to bake a wedding cake when actually really that organisation just needed a Victoria sponge. So it's about truly understanding what that business needed, because, you know, we've all seen behaviour frameworks, we've all seen performance frameworks, we've all seen recruitment, we've all seen induction, we've all seen onboarding journeys. I don't think there's anything massively new out there. It's a case of knowing what you target you're baking and then knowing the ingredients to put in which order. So I think that for me is probably where, whilst my methodology is the same, I think the application and actually what that organisation needs, you only get that really by going in and asking loads of questions from the front line about what it is really like to work there.
That's quite a nice lead in, actually. And I really like the analogy, and hopefully that's one that everybody can buy into, whether you're a Bake Off fan or not. In terms of
about baking cakes.
Well, we won't talk about that this morning. But as that lead in, really. So how do you get that level of understanding, and what recommendations, what advice would you give?
Well, bearing in mind I've had a few roles, I tend to stay places 2.5 years, do a transformation and then move on. But one thing that's probably quite consistent with my approach, in all fairness, is, you know, it's like when you go to a new role and you spend your first few days, you'll meet all the exec and they'll tell you all about their business. I've kind of never done it that way. I do always ask the relevant CEO that I'm going into work for, please may I have a couple of weeks out in the business, actually spending. So if I think of social care has been in a sector I've been in for a while now, I'll go out and do a shift as a dining room, I'll go and do a shift as a housekeeper, I'll go and shadow care, because then when I get back to the office, because I'll never get that time again. Once you get into a job, you will never get the opportunity to go and spend truly a couple of weeks immersed in the business.
Because you'll never be able to break away from it once
once you get in, you've got media and everything else. Giles, it just won't happen. But I find that more important, because then when you go back and have your meetings with the exec, you understand their functional areas because you've spent time in them, and then can ask real meaningful questions about how you can help them deliver their agenda. So I would say definitely spending time out in the business is one thing. I also look to actually ask the external market. One of the first things I usually do, depending on which is the big challenge, if it's recruitment, attraction, retention, I also engage third parties. So I'll speak to the agencies that we use, or speak to the contractors, because I really want a bit of a warts and all view as to what are we like as an organisation to work for, and what do people say about us when they come back to register to go for a job. So I think you've just got to calibrate all of those different reference points about what people perceive about the organisation, and is it a perception or is it a fact? So that would be what I'd say, is because then when you have those conversations with the exec, you can really get to the nub of the issue quite quickly, and therefore understand their challenges and say, you may perceive this, but actually here's what your frontline people are saying. You know, so if you think of the vision, everyone at exec can usually articulate it, but can that care worker, can that dining room assistant Do they really know what it is? How far down the structure does it really permeate in terms of what the organisation is all about and its purpose?
And tell me, how is that best delivered? Because that isn't necessarily, I can imagine, especially within social care or care, where I know you've had a lot of experience, delivering that kind of a message, warts and all, can probably be quite sobering and maybe even quite difficult for exec to hear. How is that best delivered?
Usually quite directly. But
That doesn't surprise me.
No, just a case, right, here's what I've heard, here's what I've observed. And it's not an opinion, it's just let me talk you through some of the kind of sound bites that I heard and why we might be getting those sound bites. But more importantly, by the time I've usually got to those kind of induction meetings with the exec, I've already started to think about, well, if that is the perception, what can we do to change it? So it isn't just usually, here's a download of everything I've heard, good, bad, and different. It's, here's what I've heard, and actually here's some ideas. Can we talk about how HR as a function can therefore help you as a function deliver your goals?
Yeah, and then it starts to become quite impactful in terms of the difference that you can make or HR can make as a function.
Well, you can quickly get to the kind of nub of the issue, really, And the thing is, a bit like we went back to the analogy of, let's not bake a wedding cake. Sometimes if you can just focus on 2 or 3 things that are really creating a lot of noise and focus on fixing those really well and engaging with colleagues, because I think internal comms is massive when you're doing any kind of transformation. If you can do 1 or 2 things well, it gives people the confidence that you are listening to them, you are going to change things, and then you can start motivating on the rest of it. Sometimes you can be a bit overwhelmed by, God, there's 20 things that need fixing. And you can start fixing 20 things and then you end up finishing none.
Yeah.
So I try to get my teams to focus on, let's focus on 2 or 3 things. Let's do them really, really well. Engage people right up front. And once you've done those and we embed those, then we'll look to start something else. And if you can pick the right 2 or 3, sometimes they can knock a few other things off down the line, actually, because they kind of are the underlying root cause of something else.
Yeah. You also talked about the time spent within a business or an organisation helps you to identify the potential value creators. Can you expand on that a little bit as well?
Well, I suppose it's, when you think of, I'll go back to, say, my insurance days. Spent time in the contact centre and, we were listening to calls, spent time out on the phones, encouraged everybody to get back on. And on the couple of days when I was on those calls, all you heard was people say, oh, will I get it any cheaper if I have an alarm? Will I get it any cheaper if I have an alarm? And you think, yeah, you'll go and get an alarm. Well, from that, we went back to the senior management team and said, loads of people are asking for alarms. Do you think we could offer alarms, and then make a bit of money? Well, actually, that insurance company did just that, got 2 vans, 2 installers, and within about 11 months, we're the number 2 alarm provider in the country, actually going out to people's, workplaces, fitting the alarm so that they could get insurance. And they gave them 28 days to do it so they could get a reduction on their insurance premium. And you think, that would have never happened had you not gone out, sat and listened to a couple of days of calls and just thought, wow, why wouldn't we do alarms?
That is brilliant. I love that. So you also talk about the key foundations or building blocks of HR. Can you talk to us a little bit about what those are and how you go about identifying them and then putting them in place?
Yeah, I mean, for the last few years, I've always tried to visualise and put a picture around a HR strategy. I think a lot of people think HR is a bit of a black art, certainly senior leaders do. So I have a pictorial view of the HR structure where the org design, well, actually the business strategy is the foundation block. Has it got clear business strategy from which your HR strategy is then and your people strategy is built on? From there, the first thing I look at is the org design. So, and again, is the organisation structured to deliver those services well to the customer? Has everybody got clear on purpose? Do they know what a good job looks like? Do they know how, if they wanted to progress to the next job, what it looks like and what the step up, not just in accountability, but the step up in skill and behaviour required to get to the next level? So I would say that is my foundation block. And that's usually where I spend, if I'm being honest with you, Giles, most of my money. Because I run facilitated workshops, usually with an independent third party, to engage with as much of the workforce as we can to say, right, you tell us about your job. Tell us what you do, how you deliver it, and also what gets in the way of doing a great job. And they'll come out with loads of information. They'll never tell a HR person what it's really like to work there, but they will tell an independent third party. So once we've got that kind of rich data back in and we've got the structures and we look, and that's another place where we added real value. To give you another example, at Studio, we did that whole piece of work and found out actually there was quite a lot of roles. A, that there was duplication of effort across functions. B, there were some roles who didn't really have accountability. They just went in every day, worked hard, but kind of cleared up other stuff that other people didn't really want to do in their jobs.
Yeah.
We took, oh God, it must be about £1 million out in kind of headcount, but we invested all of that back into about maybe 100 out and about 40 odd heads back into IT, DevOps, enterprise architects, to really catapult that organisation to being a digital player and an online retailer. And I don't think we'd have been able to do that because we wouldn't have had the money unless we absolutely streamlined the org design of it well. So that's the foundation block. And once you've got that and you've got real clarity of the role, you know what you're going to, you know what you're going to market to recruit against. You know exactly what that role is going to do and how to do it, so you know what you need for your induction and onboarding. You know how you're going to performance manage it because you've got clear accountabilities, measures of success, measures of behaviour. That then, when you've got that structure, gives you, how do you map your career and identify your talent? And most importantly, how do you reward? Because we all know if there's HR professionals on here, you can go out and look on LinkedIn for HR BP, and that salary can range from 40 to 100.
Yeah, absolutely.
Real clarity of the size of that job and what it's accountable for means that you can then do your reward and recognition programs built around a more rigorous role profile and expectation. So they tend to be the building blocks. So once you've got your clear OD, I'd say your pillars of success, and then just what I've articulated there. And then really wrapped around that is culture and engagement. And I do that through 9 times out of 10, I will put internal comms in my structure, because I think people need to see that HR are more than just people who put up your poster. You have to find ways of engaging with people so they see the value that HR can bring to the table.
And in terms of delivering those comms, what has worked best in your experience, or does that tend to vary for the different organisations you work for?
It really varies, because a lot of people think an email, as soon as you ping an email, it's out. You know, Yammer can be great, but when you work in organisations where 70% of your people don't actually have a company email address, you've got to find other ways of being able to do it, whether that's a newsletter, whether that is actually ironically a poster, usually on the back of the toilet. How can you have cascade comms so that you can give it to your team leaders so they can use it as prompts to get the message out? So it's seen more of a leadership message than a HR message. It really does depend on the organisation, Giles. That one, I don't think you can do a one size fits all, genuinely.
Yeah. So we've got a challenge, a huge challenge in the market right now. Everybody's talking about it, in that we've got unemployment. As we know, our employment is at an all-time high. Unemployment is an all-time low. We're almost in a position of stagnation and stasis at the moment in terms of talent, and it's incredibly difficult to find, especially for some of the more, let's say, professional roles or those that require a level of expertise. In terms of internal succession planning and talent development and that kind of stuff, we touched on that and talked about that a little bit in terms of the importance of having that in place and then being able to promote people from within. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the Skills for Care report, I think, came out this week, and quite familiar with social care. I mean, they talked about, just to give you some stats that I've got here, vacancy rates are up 52% this year in that sector. There's an expectation that they're going to need an additional 480,000 care workers by 2035 if we're going to keep up with the kind of profile of the aging population. Interestingly, this was a stat that I wasn't expecting to see. Care workers with 5 years experience are paid 7p an hour more than those with less than 1. And 80% of jobs in the economy pay more than roles in social care. So, and turnover rates are continuing to increase. So in that sector, of all of the sectors I've recognised, everywhere is challenged. I think social care is probably one of the most challenged, because I think people did that because they had a love of wanting to care for others. That is overtaken by the fact that there's a cost of living crisis, and if you can get 50p an hour more in Aldi or Tesco, and that's the difference between putting heating on for your kids or not, then that vocation, and you did it because the love of the job, it's not a driver there that people can afford to make anymore. So in terms of recruitment, and the challenge in those roles, one of the things we've done at Edison, and I've done before, looks a little bit different at Edison because it's a bit smaller. We've mapped out the candidate and colleague experience that we want somebody to have, either joining us, right through their career with us, and then leaving us. What do we want them to know, to do, and how do we want them to feel at each of those key moments that matter in that cycle with us? And actually, how can we make it last a little bit longer?
Yeah.
When we've built our applicant tracking system and our the candidate journey and the emails, we've gone back to that experience document that the managers helped us write and say, is it going to deliver that? Is it going to make people feel like that? They're going to know it and they're going to do this. So that has been quite pivotal in shaping all of our decisions for all the systems that we're building around it to build around the experience. And then once we've got those role profiles, it's how do we make sure that we advertise what people need to do if they want to step up and progress their pay. Because in our reward structure, if you've been there more than 5 years, chances are you're qualified, you will be on an extra 50p an hour. If you're a senior, you'll be on an extra £1 an hour. So, you've got to think about ways in which you can keep people in the organisation, because it's much easier to retain them than it is to go and recruit and replace them.
Well, yeah, exactly. And that leads on to sort of my next question, really, in terms of, and I think we might talk about this a little bit more shortly, in terms of data and knowing your numbers. I'm just wondering how many organisations are able to calculate the cost of attrition versus the cost of actually hiring people, bringing them into the organisation.
We do actually, everywhere I've gone, in fact, in every role, it's something I've calculated. It's even easier when you work in professional services because you can work out the fee income of somebody who's But even if you take care, if you look at the salary from one joining, where they're in induction and they're not actually providing any services that's chargeable. If you look at the cost of DBS, the cost of putting them, we worked out a typical cost for bringing on a care worker, particularly as you had to pay for them to get qualified, was on average £2,700. So every time, if we'd lost them, it would be £2,700 to replace them. Now, that doesn't include the headcount of all the recruitment team and all the training team, because you're never really going to cash that check in, to be fair. But the cashable and the bankable check is the £2,700. So for every one person you can prevent from leaving, there's £2,700 you can pretty much put back in the bank. So it's being able to quantify that. And, if you look at some of the homes, some of them are churning more and more and more. Now, park the financial implications of that, because that's one thing. But can you imagine being a child having like a different parent every couple of weeks because you can't retain people? That's not a great outcome for kids. So it's definitely about how can we improve retention as well as improving our attraction campaigns. That allows us to grow. The retention allows us to keep that workforce stable and therefore keep those children's placements stable.
Absolutely. And that, I guess that doesn't even factor in the cost of not having anybody in post once they have left for the period of time before you can recruit them back in, get them trained, inducted successfully and settling and performing.
Well, at Sunrise, we actually did quantify that. And in 2020, we put in a whole host, as the pandemic hit, we put hot meals on, we put minibuses to get people so they didn't have to public transport. We changed all the construct of how we were going to do overtime. We spent about £1 million. We took 800k out by reducing turnover by over 30%. That was one thing about 800 odd K. The big win was because we were losing less people, we weren't backfilling them from them going and someone starting with overtime or contract labour. 1.5 million off the overtime bill and about 2.7 off the contract labour bill. So when you added all that up, we spent £1 million, but saved 5. So the net was 4. And that's where I think HR, from some perspectives, probably don't maybe talk about some of the commercials, enough in terms of some of the functions I've gone into, which is probably why I get the role really. But I think HR is becoming more and more, particularly over the pandemic, a commercially driven function, putting people at the heart of its business so that people can then deliver the service to the customer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's a big part of it in terms of, HR becoming more commercially aware. But I mean, it's a lot of people that may not have even considered that today. I mean, there are simple steps or recommendations or advice you can give for HR in terms of, firstly, how to get hold of those numbers, get to grips with the data, and then start using that in a successful way.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of organisations I've gone into haven't had a HR system, haven't had an applicant tracking system, so getting the data is really hard. Now, there's ways and means. Payroll usually are great for data because they'll see everybody coming on, going off. But trying to get at least a baseline of where you are. So, for example, we managed to do a piece of work. It took us about 4 weeks on and off trying to get the data. But at Edison, when we stood back and looked, for every 10 offers, 5.3 of them were dropping off. We had a 53% dropout rate from offering them a job, thinking you've got someone in the field that vacancy, never starting. Only 47% would walk through the door. And even then, we had a really low 90-day retention level. So when we put in our colleague experience, built our applicant tracking system around it, and started to build a journey and be really clear with the comms and the messaging, that's gone down to 31% dropout rate, which I know is still high, but that's a 40% drop, which means you don't have to have as many. If you work that back through from a number, if you are losing less there's less you need to offer. Because there's less you need to offer, there's less you need to interview. Because there's less you need to interview, there's less. So it just goes back through the funnel of actually what you need coming in the top of the hopper to be able to get out of the bottom, actually people walking in the door.
It's all very formulaic when you come down to it, and it doesn't surprise me at all. We see a lot challenge of people accepting offers, contracts, all the rest of it, and then simply just not arriving for the first day or churning in some way. And the simple fact is that, especially in this market now, it is so competitive. The best people will be receiving job offers even after they may have accepted an offer from you. You know, there'll be other roles and other approaches and that kind of thing. And the most important is not just that elements of compliance, but that element of actually connecting with the individual, creating a line of communication, giving them a feel of your culture and the fact they've almost joined before they've joined in some way.
Yeah, and I mean, the team at Edison are great, led by Becky. She's a cracking, recruitment team leader, and she's always, kind of engaging with the candidate, keeping them informed at every stage. She's written some great email comms, so rather than, thank you for your application, it's like, hey, great, we've got you, we've got your application, brilliant news, you're through to the next stage. They're really quite informal and chatty because actually, people want to get a sense of the personality of your organisation. So we kind of ripped up the very formal kind of emails and kind of did them just really chatty, a bit more tech speak, I would say. And it seems to have really resonated. The big thing that we're working on at the moment is how can we move that relationship from being very recruitment-led, from a psychological connection perspective, to actually getting the manager, the hiring manager.
My next question. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think we'll have a lot less dropouts. We get ghosted post-offer. A lot of them just don't get back to us. Whereas if we can build that bit of connection with the registered manager going, hey, I'm really looking forward to meeting you, the team are really looking forward to seeing you, hey, next week your induction starts, I'll make sure I pop down and see you. All of those things to make it really hard for somebody to walk away from it. How can you make them feel really special rather than just another bum on a seat? Because that's not the way the world is at the moment, Giles.
No, it's not.
Come to us, not the other way around.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And from an ATS perspective, with job training, we have a welcome hub that facilitates a lot of that. But even at the most basic level, just as you said, a simple text message, or maybe a WhatsApp, or even better, perhaps a quick video saying, hey, hi from the team or from the manager, we're looking forward to seeing you, just to bring that person in and give that person a sense of the culture, the organisation, that they're a part of it before they join, is so important, especially when competition is so fierce for people.
I mean, I'm not saying I've got it right at all. There's some bits I get horribly wrong, in all fairness, where you think, oh God, I really thought that word, but it kind of didn't. But, I think it's really about, for me, understanding what colleagues feel. And then when they start, so we've put in place a new starter survey. So we'll do a post-induction. How did you think it went? How was week 1? How was week 2? What lessons can we learn? Then we'll do an 8-week, and then we'll do a 12-week. And we then do an exit interview, and the questions for the new starter interview and the exit interview are actually really similar, other than...
Okay, can you give us some examples?
Talk us through, my induction was really clear and it was really easy to understand. I had everything I needed to do a great job when I started. My manager gives me regular feedback. You know, there's a really friendly environment with my colleagues. I can't remember specifics of that, and we ask those questions at the early stages. We also ask those questions at the end, and it's quite interesting because you can start to see, even at week 12, people are going, well, I'm not really sure this is giving me the flexibility that I thought when I signed up for that job. You know, actually, I wasn't set up for success. I didn't really know a clue what I was doing. And I don't think this is going to have the career pathway. So the 3 reasons why I joined, usually the 3 reasons why people left. So you can start to think, so that made us think about, we're over promising on flexibility in the advert. We can't be going out saying, oh, it's flexible shifts and it's this, when actually it's not. So don't fib, because all that will happen is they'll come in, they'll work 3 months and then go, this isn't really what you sold me. So that's where I think that new starter and exit, because you can start to see early doors. If they've got a problem by week 12 and then you look at the exit, it becomes a major issue and a reason for leaving.
Yeah. It makes so much sense, and I guess it underpins and reinforces the importance of having a talent strategy, and sometimes recruitment is seen almost as a completely separate function from HR, whereas talent is holistic. It sits right across the organisation and it's cyclical as well. And having those measurements from the recruiting perspective, in terms of like new hire or candidates' experience, and then taking almost exactly the same measurements and comparing the two and identifying the gaps, is really, really important. But I wonder how often that's done.
Not as often as you'd think, to be fair there, Giles. I mean, if you stand back and think of talent, a lot of it, you're right, is recruitment. But if you know from your business strategy and your business plan, say for example, Edison wants to double the number of homes and double the number of schools in the next 3 years. Well, you know that each home from an operating model perspective is a manager, a trainee registered manager, a couple of seniors, and then a team of maybe 4 or 5. So that one home, if it's got 2 or 3 children, will need 10. So if you want to open 10 homes, there's 100 people. So if you look at when they'll come on street, when you're going to buy them in the budget, when you think you'll get the planning permission to transfer it, you can then start working backwards and think, right, we're going to need 10 registered managers. Who do we think in our current TRM pipeline, trainee registered managers, do we think in the next year could be ready for that? Right, from there, who from our seniors do we think could step up to be trainee registered managers, so that you always backfill at the lowest level? That is just something, this organisation started to think of. And a lot of organisations don't think about it like that, because they're so in the moment of just trying to keep up with the current vacancy. To actually start thinking about what they need in a year's time, it's quite hard while Rome's burning over here and you can't fill the vacancies you've got at the moment. So it's about how do you try and balance both of those. Because if you want someone in a year, you've got to start giving them their development programme now, I would say. Giving them opportunities to cover, getting them on the level 5 qualification, getting them some real leadership development. Because leadership for me is probably the biggest thing that will influence your retention.
Absolutely. There's that analogy, I don't know if you're familiar with it, where you've got a river and you're at the bottom of the river, and suddenly you've got all these people coming down the drowning, and you're jumping into the river to try and move as many people as possible before actually taking a pause to try and identify and work out why people are falling into the river in the first place and then coming downstream. And I guess it's something very, very similar in terms of talent and having a more overarching holistic view of talent. So what's working, where are the issues, and what do we need to solve, rather than just simply firefighting all the time? And that can be a challenge.
But also, what do we mean by talent? What does good look like? Which takes me back, I suppose, to my original foundation block of org design.
Yeah.
What does a great registered manager look like? What will they be doing, and how will they be doing it? What skills will they have, and what behaviours will they display that will drive your target culture? Because you just see RM and you see offset requirements. But actually, what does it mean for that organisation to be a manager in that organisation?
And that's probably going to vary from one organisation to another as well. So rather than just saying, okay, well, this is the person we need, who have we actually got that are performing the best and having an impact to our business, and then using that to start to develop out those role profiles more meaningfully.
And then also, if you can promote those people, what a great message to send out. Actually, I mean, if I look at the last few promotions, I did a post recently, actually. Whilst, yes, we had to go to market for 2 new head teachers for the schools, most of the internal in the care division, we had a registered manager step up to an area manager, which created a sideways move from a small bed home to a larger bed home for David. And then his trainee registered manager got a step up into there. So they are great news stories that have to be promoted so that you can say to people, yes, you may start as a £10 an hour care worker, but a couple of years in and qualifications later, you could be that 40k registered manager, with responsibility for running your own home.
And what a powerful story in terms of EVP to tell potential recruits in terms of this is what the journey looks like at our organisation.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. I love it. Sharon, any other further tips? I mean, this morning's been so helpful in terms of looking right from the very, very start in terms of getting back to the floor, understanding the organisation, its needs, what works well, what doesn't, putting the HR foundation building blocks in place, looking at a full talent strategy, role profiles, but not just sort of role profiles picked off the shelf, but in terms of actually looking at the people that are performing within the organisation, what looks meaningful, and then building a talent strategy around that. Anything else there? Obviously, knowing your numbers is a key part, but I think you've been able to make that quite simple for everybody to understand in terms of it is actually quite formulaic. If you have the right systems in place, or you have a vendor in place, you should be talking to them in terms of, right, how can you help to support me to understand what is working, what needs fixing? Because a lot of that is just about servicing data that already exists within the organisation, be able to have actionable insights.
Yeah, I mean, I take myself back to Sunrise when the pandemic was hitting. We had job train. We reached out to you and said, right, we need to understand the funnel. How many people are clicking on job train but then not applying? Can you give us the back end data so we can see how many we're losing? Do we need to rewrite our ads? Do we need to rewrite anything? Because we need more coming through the funnel. So I would definitely say reach out to whoever your provider is. If that information is keyed in there somewhere, and with a bit of Google Analytics, you should be able to get some real meaningful data as to where in the journey are you losing people if you are struggling to get them in the door. But for me, I think it's definitely spending time out in the business. I think sometimes we can get stuck in HR. And I think we can sometimes get stuck in a bit of a HR vocabulary as well. So you talk about EVP and you talk about interventions. I kind of say, what's the deal for working here? What is the deal for coming to work for the organisation? And I kind of use this a bit. I'm not really one for analogies, but I'm going to give you two today. I'm giving you my bake-off one. I think HR, if we think of marketing, right, their job is to go and attract new customers, get those customers on board, maximize the performance of that customer by way of either purchase, repeat purchase, share a wallet, keep and retain that customer, have that customer spread the good word in terms of brand advocacy and say loads about you, offload those customers that don't serve you well, whether it's people who don't pay their bills, etc. And I think if you were to swap C with customer with C with colleague, I think that's where HR needs to think differently. How do we attract the colleagues, maximize their performance, make them really loyal and brand advocates? But that has implications because we're so used to talking about segmenting and having personas for different customers and targeting the right message at the right time to get the best outcome. I genuinely believe HR needs to think a little bit like that too.
So you're almost talking about interchanging consumer experience with talent experience.
Yeah, the colleague experience. A frontline care worker will expect something different to a head teacher, who will expect something different to part of the psychology team and the therapy team. One message is not, and one approach won't fit for all of those. It might be a bit too complicated for some levels. It might feel a bit too noddy and a bit patronising for others. So why wouldn't we, in some ways, segment our own internal customer base, think about the messaging that's going to land with them and resonate with them best, so that we can maximise the performance of those in the same way that marketing would. Although we never get a marketing budget, I hasten to add.
Perfect. Sharon, this has been so helpful this morning. Thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure. I hope everybody here has enjoyed our session this morning. If you've got any questions, then do feel free to send them after if you want. We'll do a write-up of this morning's session too. But yeah, all there is to say is, look, thanks for joining us. Have a super week and hope to see you all again soon. Thank you so much. Thanks, Sharon.